Hi, everyone. I'm Bruce Karasik, co-founder of the Jewish Republican Alliance. We're so happy to have Larry Greenfield here with us today. We'll be speaking with Larry in just a few minutes. But first, the Democrats had the founding member of the Women's March, known anti-Semite, Linda Sarsour, speak at the convention this week. May I be more blunt? She hates Jews. She hates Israel. She's spoken out against Israel's right to exist. She supports the BDS movement, a boycott, divest, and sanction movement against Israel. She is a supporter of Louis Farrakhan, who is called Jews satanic and other worse things. And when he was asked whether he was an anti-Semite, he says, no, I'm not an anti-Semite, I'm anti-termite, insinuating that Jews should be exterminated. But socialist Bernie Sanders also had an opportunity to speak this week at the Democrat convention. But who was his surrogate when he was running for office and his spokesperson? None other than Linda Sarsour. So that's your Democrat Party. They're all tied together. But after getting pushed back, suddenly Joe Biden comes out and disavows any ties to Linda Sarsour. And then Google starts running cover for Joe Biden. Now, if you do a search like I did to try to find the anti-Semitic remarks made by Linda Sarsour, what do you get? You get Google saying Joe Biden disavows any ties to Linda Sarsour. And my question for Joe is, how do you not know who is supposed to be speaking at your convention? Who set this up? How could you not be on top of this? How could you potentially be trusted to run the United States of America without being able to run your own convention? Anyway, to me, it looks bad for Joe Biden. It looks bad for the Democrats. And I didn't hear a single journalist pressing him on questions like that at all. But I know the left-wing media is brainwashing its listeners. The anger and the hatred that we continue to see from the Jewish left and others is being fueled by the media who are not presenting alternative views. They're not hearing both sides. They're being fed news like we are in North Korea or China or Russia. The attitude of the left is, we will tell you what we want you to know. Don't challenge us, shut up, put on your mask, don't say anything, just obey us. If not, we're gonna cancel you, we're gonna send a mob to your house, we're going to bring down your business, you're gonna get fired, or we may even do physical harm to you. And then they threaten to take away people's guns, their ability to defend themselves, and either defund the police, or as Joe Biden calls it, reallocate funds from the police, so everybody else is feeling even more vulnerable. But every week we have more examples of this. Just this week, an NBA photographer was fired for posting a pro-Trump meme. And then a Stockton University student was suspended for having a Trump background on his Zoom. And not one reporter is calling into question Joe Biden's lack of memory, his mixing up words, forgetting what he's talking about, where he is, what office he's running for. Not one, not even Fox News during the day, only at night. Now, if the Obama administration is a predictor of what will happen to Jews and Israel if Biden is elected, it is not good. On the other hand, Donald Trump and Mike Pence have made it clear that they have supported Israel and supported Jews and have stated unequivocally when it comes to the Palestinian-Israeli relationship that they stand with Israel. They have made promises and they have kept their promises. So right now, so we can get to our show, I'd like to introduce my fellow co-founder, Mitch Silberman. Mitch, take it away.
Hello, JRA community. It's always so great when we're together. One of the most frequently asked questions I've gotten over the years is, how do I talk to my friends that are liberal? What do I say to them? Well, let me start off by saying, if they are so far to the left that they think America is bad, that Israel's the problem in the Middle East, or they want to defund the police, I would say it's probably not a good use of your time. They are so far left, there's probably nothing you can say to change their mind. It's like the old saying, don't wrestle with a pig. You both get dirty, but the pig likes it. Now, if you have friends that are center-left, friends or family, or moderate Democrats, let me tell you what not to do. Do not insult them directly or indirectly. So a direct insult would be, you're not going to vote for that senile idiot, are you? Not a good thing to say. An indirect insult would be, anyone that votes for a Democrat obviously hates America. Again, if you try to change minds, do not insult them directly or indirectly. So what do you do? Two things: be respectful and be inquisitive, okay? So here's an example of a great question you might want to ask them. Wouldn't you agree that President Trump's been really great for Israel? And if they start saying, oh, I can't stand him and he's this and he's that, you just politely say, well, that wasn't my question. I just want to know, do you think he's been good for Israel? And voila, if they're honest, they're going to start praising President Trump, or at least giving him compliments. Another example would be does it concern you that no one in the Democratic Party is condemning the violence or Antifa? And if they say, well, these people have grievances, and you can ask them, so are you in favor of looting businesses and destroying property and beating up innocent people? Oh, no, of course not. So again, my question is, does it bother you that no one in the Democratic Party is condemning this? So the whole idea is to get them to question their own judgment, maybe even expose their own hypocrisy to themselves. But you got to ask these questions in a thoughtful, respectful way. And it does help. You can change minds. I have changed minds. You have 74 days to change minds. So your mission, should you choose to accept it, is to think of 3 big questions you can ask people to make them think. Be respectful, be inquisitive, and unleash the power of questions. Now, a person who is a master at that is our guest today, Larry Greenfield. He has an amazing resume. I'm going to read it off to you really quickly by way of introduction. He's a longtime leader in the Jewish Republican cause, a great friend of the JRA, respected conservative columnist with the Jewish Journal. He earned his BA at UC Berkeley, graduated in 3 years as class speaker, earned his law degree at Georgetown Law Center. He enlisted in the Armed Forces of the United States and Naval Intelligence, was publisher of the Journal of International Security Affairs. His community leadership was included roles as National Executive Director of the Jewish Institute for National Security Affairs, California Director of the Republican Jewish Coalition, and Director of the Israel Cancer Research Fund. He's a longtime GOP leader and activist, the founding executive director of the Reagan Legacy Foundation. Boy, what a resume, huh? Goes on and on. He's currently a fellow at the Claremont Institute for the Study of Statesmanship and Political Philosophy, as well as an advisor to the American Freedom Alliance. So welcome, Larry, today. We're so happy to have you, Larry.
I think we have to unmute Larry there, right? There we go.
Larry needs to be unmuted.
How's that?
Oh, we got you now, Larry.
Very good. Welcome.
Well, thank you so much, guys. I'm really happy to be with you. Thanks for the kind welcome, Mitch and Bruce. And let me thank Judy and Stephanie and Tracy and Mark as well, the JRA team. I'm happy to join the Zoom call. I know most folks are probably at home and probably casually dressed. It kind of reminds me of the very wonderful comments by President Reagan. Do you remember his 1981 speech to a joint session of Congress just weeks after surviving the assassination attempt that wounded him very seriously? President Reagan stood up and he said, I received a letter from Peter Sweeney in the 2nd grade who wrote, Mr. President, you better get well soon or you're going to have to give your speech in your pajamas. I think some of us have probably been hanging out in sweats and pajamas a bit more than usual. I'm just happy wherever you are. I hope you're safe. And I hope the rolling blackouts in California mean you can get through the call and have electricity. Mitch and Bruce, as a Navy man, I know there are good ships and wood ships and big ships and fast ships, but the best ships of all are friendships. Well, maybe except for the Nimitz-class double nuclear reactor blue water aircraft carriers with angled flight decks carrying the greatest air force in the world, the United States Navy Top Gun fighter pilots. But I digress. My opening remarks are simply to celebrate the growing JRA family, to compliment the organizers and the membership. There are a lot of reasons for this growth, I think, including a very positive and growing understanding of the symmetry and connection between Jewish history and Torah values and the founding of the United States, as well as the abandonment of Jewish interests and ideals by the political left, and now a rising anti-Semitism and hatred of Israel by the academic and political left from campus to Congress, which we can talk about. I do note that the weekly JRA Zoom calls do a great job of focusing on the alliance part of the Jewish Republican Alliance, with multiple conservative Black speakers, women speakers, and Christian friends and allies. And I've been extremely pleased at the friendship that has been growing over many decades now among Jews and Christians. One poll showed that Jews are the most popular minority group in this country. If jihadists want to kill us, many Christians in the United States want to befriend us or even marry us. Unfortunately, many on the Jewish left despise Christians. Note the recent unkind attacks on the young Christian lady who was hired by the American Jewish Committee to work against anti-Semitism. What the Jewish left doesn't know or doesn't want to admit is that there's a 400-year tradition in this country called restorationism or Christian Zionism. Virtually every president, until Barack Hussein Obama, has long believed in the Jewish story of redemption and the return of the Jews to their Holy Land. The reason the left hates Israel is because it's America's best ally and little brother, and because it's religious, nationalistic, and capitalistic, and it's not going to fall in line with the globalist world order. Israel answers to a higher authority than George Soros and the United Nations. You know, we finally had a moment of Jewish unity recently. Democrats and Republicans all rallied together big time to defeat Ilhan Omar in Minnesota's congressional race. Tons of money raised across the aisle to defeat an anti-Semite. And yet, Speaker Nancy Pelosi stepped in not only to endorse Omar, but to fundraise and donate to her campaign as well. Anyways, I've always favored this alliance, this big tent approach to the GOP. Lots of diverse voices welcomed into the JRA, from students to libertarians to agnostics to older social conservatives, from grassroots business people to US vets to pro-Israelis and Christians. There are three big trends going on in American life that now impact the Jewish community. Two of them favor the JRA: the Liberty Revolution, the advocacy of individual rights and limited government and prosperity built on private property, and the return of the USA to its true first principles. Number two is the Jewish-Christian Alliance, shared Western values, shared morality, human rights and dignity, shared attention to radical Islam, which has declared war on us jointly. See bin Laden's declaration of war in 1998 against the Jews and the Christians. But there's a third trend, which is very negative for us, which is the rise of the left, including the Jewish left, which began with Rousseau, continued with Voltaire in the Enlightenment, continued with Marx and so-called statists and progressives and socialists, and now add in Antifa and BLM Marxists. And I'm sorry to say, a Jewish left is part and parcel of that radical left. Winning elections has always been about addition. And so I'm happy today to offer my positive Jewish Republican case as we head into election 2020.
That's fantastic, Larry. So well said. You know, ladies and gentlemen, there's no greater expert here in America on the political philosophy of Jewish conservatism. So Larry, if you wouldn't mind, I would love to hear your thoughts on the basic principles of that movement.
Well, thank you very much. So the answer is clear and detailed, and I'm very joyous about the rich uncovering and revealing and teaching of this by scholars like Yarom Hazoni, the folks at the Tikva Fund. If you click on and read Mosaic and Tablet, the online publications, there's just this rich literature and rediscovery of the Hebrew Bible, the Israelite kingdom, as the basis for, as a support system for the American Constitution, our morality, our race, our system of justice, our way of life. The American founders were deeply rooted in the Hebrew scriptures. They knew Hebrew, which was taught at America's first universities. James Madison, the primary author of the US Constitution, studied Hebrew at Princeton. then known as the College of New Jersey. Our founders believed in biblical stories. They took their legal and ethical inspiration from the Ten Commandments. The settlers to the New World 400 years ago proclaimed that they were like the Hebrews fleeing Egypt to find freedom. They stated, in fact, that they were founding a new Zion. The author Herman Melville once famously said that we Americans are a peculiar chosen people, quote, the Israel of our time. He wrote, we bear the ark of the liberties of the world. The Liberty Bell in Philadelphia, of course, has the inscription from Leviticus 25:10, proclaim liberty throughout the land and to all the inhabitants thereof. Abraham Lincoln, who taught himself to read by firelight, mostly the biographies of George Washington and the Bible, and he called the United States an almost chosen nation. So we know that the American colonists and the major preachers in the New World and the constitutional framers, and then the advocates for the abolition of slavery, all relied on the story of the Israelites and their redemption from slavery to freedom as their model. They also found in the Hebrew scriptures significant legal and moral and ethical basis for our legal and economic system. I'll just give you two examples. The Torah is passionately in favor of free enterprise economics. We are co-creators with God. That's the essential theme of Genesis. We are responsible to grow our food and to work and to build our communities. We are not free to become dependent on government or to avoid our own individual duty to help the widow, the poor, and the orphan. We believe in charity, yes, but it is our obligation not just to help the needy, but also because our humanity demands on us that we reflect the care for humans modeled by God. The rabbis taught better to violate the Shabbat and work than to be dependent. Please look up the work of Rabbi Joseph Lifshitz, who has clarified that Jewish and Torah-based economics are anything but socialism. This has nothing to do with government programs. This is about the nobility of humans to be productive and the honor of human beings to be charitable and be responsible for our ethical behavior. Second, we are also commanded to defend ourselves and our families, community, and nation. If evil comes, we are to wake up early first and defend ourselves. Pacifism and appeasement of evil are not part of our tradition. The modern lessons of the Holocaust and the vulnerability to being stateless remain a major underpinning of our passionate support for America's success and survival and the survival of the Jewish state. So American conservatives remain loyal to our American founding, our Constitution, separation of powers, checks and balances, the idea of limited government, skepticism of power, and even subsidiarity, the idea that the government governs best, which is closest to the people. We are deeply skeptical of the Leviathan state, the administrative state, the lobbyists and lawyers and the wealthiest region of our country now, Washington, D.C., and the unending corruption and search for power. There is nothing Jewish about the Obama-era EPA or IRS or Department of Justice or the FBI and intelligence community going after conservatives with malice and bias. I am very, very happy to see now finally some indictments against the gang that tried to use the levers of government against the Trump 2016 campaign and then to sabotage the incoming administration. Look, we believe in good and evil. We believe in God-given, not state-given individual rights. We believe in self-reliance and objective truths and eternal verities, in the nobility and aspiration of the individual, in the principles of liberty rooted in equality, because we are all created in God's image, or as Joe Biden would call it, the thing. We believe in the American way of equality of opportunity, not the Marxist equality of outcome, which produces a shared misery we see in every socialist economy from Cuba to Venezuela. We believe in the America of Washington and Lincoln and Teddy Roosevelt and Reagan and Milton Friedman and Norman Podhoretz and so many conservative Jewish voices and teachers. It is no accident that the Democratic Party today of Bernie Sanders, a Jewish socialist who honeymooned in the USSR, has abandoned American exceptionalism, all references to our religious roots and foundation, and rejects the spirit of democratic capitalism. And for all of this, the media and academe and Hollywood and the Democrats smear us and abuse us. But our great hero, Natan Sharansky, called his autobiography, Fear No Evil. We will continue to stand with the United States. We will stand up for our heroes and our eternal verities and our founding principles. We will stand for the national anthem that proclaims we are the land of the free and home of the brave. And we will kneel for none but God and believe in our motto of the United States, E pluribus unum, not a balkanization of America into race, class, and gender identity, but the unification of the American people into one strong, united states.
Larry, I need to congratulate you. You are the first Jewish speaker that the Jewish Republican Alliance has hosted via Zoom, so well done.
Thank you. Thank you.
So I know this is on a lot of people's minds. Can you please discuss what we all feel is the lack of self-examination by the dominant progressive Jewish agenda?
Mitch, there was once a Jewish Democrat named Joe Lieberman, a mensch, a patriot, a class act, and 20 years ago, the Democrats nominated him as their vice presidential pick, a centrist and a good soul. But Connecticut Democrats threw him out of their party. And he went on to endorse Senator McCain against Obama, and he's now an independent. My grandparents' last name was also Lieberman. They were also lifelong Democrats. Friends, this is not our grandparents' Democratic Party. The party of Harry Truman, who recognized Israel, and the JFK, who was a Navy vet and an advocate for freedom, and a tax cutter, and a believer in American greatness and exceptionalism. This is no longer the party of Henry Scoop Jackson, who pushed the Soviets to let our people go. This is now the party of Peace Now, Jewish leftists, and what Jeane Kirkpatrick once called San Francisco Democrats. Have they learned any lessons? You would think that they would not want to be on the same side as the enemies and haters of America who endorsed Joe Biden, like murderous mullahs of Iran, or Chinese communists, or Venezuelan vultures, or the crazy Cuban communists, or savage socialists, or tax-grubbing globalists. Those people all want Joe Biden. Why would the Jewish left want him? The Democrats are now the party of Rashida Tlaib and Al Sharpton and Linda Sarsour and Ilhan Omar and anti-Zionists and Jew haters and baiters. And they're the party of Jerry Nadler, the New York Jewish congressman who said of Antifa, the vicious anti-Semitic group, they're a myth. He said that even though we're now 85 nights in a row into Antifa violence in Portland. The Democrats are the party of Adam Schiff, who purposely ignored all the conspiracy of the Democrats and projected it onto the Republicans. Or how about Jacob Frey, the Minneapolis Jewish leftist, who allowed the takeover and destruction of the 3rd Police Precinct in Minneapolis, the one that invited the insurrection and the revolution of violence, what Lincoln warned us against, mobocratic rule. They're the party of Dianne Feinstein, so thoroughly corrupt and compromised by Chinese spies and communists, she used her career to build up $1 billion net worth for her husband and her. She's the one who turned her back on the 1995 Jerusalem Embassy Relocation Act because she didn't want Bob Dole to get any credit for it when he ran for president in '96. She's the one who openly schemed to destroy Brett Kavanaugh with a fraudulent process that so offended moderate Senator Collins that the Democrats finally lost the fight to deny him the Supreme Court seat. And of course, the party of Bernie Sanders, the ineffective radical, over 40 years on the government dole, who sells his socialism and free college talk to our kids like a drug, who's taken over the Democratic Party. Do you remember the Bernie Sanders campaign organizer in Iowa who called literally for gulags to re-educate us, said we would be forced to break rocks and study their manifesto, and who warned about the mass violence and the burning cities if Bernie did not win nomination? There's a reason Stalin had gulags, correct? Have you heard any Jewish leftists on campus, in Congress, perhaps in synagogues, reveal to you that Palestinian leadership joined World War II to join Hitler's Nazi movement, advise him on the final solution, and raise a Muslim army to fight against the United States? Are you aware that the Palestinians today wave the Nazi flag as they gather for riots on Israel's border, still seeking Jewish destruction again? Let me tell you a story. In 1983, I arrived to Washington, D.C. as a new law student at Georgetown and as AIPAC's legal intern. I was 21 years old. I helped to write the arrest warrant for PLO chief Yasser Arafat, who'd ordered the murder of American diplomats in Khartoum, Sudan. We had the audio tapes. Fortunately, the Reagan administration's Attorney General Ed Meese helped to use that arrest warrant to deter Arafat from appearing at the UN. The Reagan and later the Bush administrations were fantastic in the support for Soviet Jewry and Ethiopian Jewry. In pursuit of his policy of deterrence and defeating the evil empire, the Soviet Union in the Cold War, President Reagan promoted Strategic Defense Initiative. And I was an early advocate of ballistic missile defense. Every Jewish Democrat mocked that entire project as Star Wars, saying, quote, a bullet cannot hit a bullet, called it a waste of money. But Reagan knew it would bankrupt the USSR, and he held firm at the famous Reykjavik summit in 1986, and he was willing to walk away even though the media gave him a hard time. Finally, Gorbachev cracked, and we won the Cold War. Do you know what happened to that missile defense program from the 1980s? It spun off the Iron Dome system, which keeps Israeli children, men, and women alive every day from incoming Palestinian and other regional threats of rockets, mortars, and missiles. This past week, in the form of the Arrow 2 and Arrow 3 missile defense systems, which successfully engaged a Sparrow target missile, a longer-range surface-to-surface missile, the wisdom of Ronald Reagan was proved correct again. So Jewish Democrats have been wrong for a couple generations now, and weak and unimpressive, and it's a shame. By the way, the Israelis know this. The Jewish left in Israel has been defeated repeatedly. Bibi Netanyahu is now in his 11th straight year and 14th overall as Likud party leader in Israel. The Jewish left has been marginalized in Israel and has almost no credibility left on security issues. I'll hold there and maybe continue with further questions.
Thank you, Larry. So well said. You know, for 4.5 years, I've been speaking in public about some of the accomplishments, or many of the accomplishments, of Donald Trump and President Trump and his administration. And now he's up for re-election. So what is Trumpism? And in your mind, is it good for America? Is it good for Israel? What about his re-election?
Thank you, Bruce. So if you Google my name and author and Jewish Journal, you'll see my articles at the Jewish Journal, sort of archived. And I made the case for the Trump-Pence re-election in my July 2019 cover story debate with the Jewish Democrats. First of all, I like the idea of buying Greenland. That sounds good to me. Let's make that clear. How do you think we got Louisiana and California and Texas, by the way? We bought them fair and square. Look, Trumpism is based on 3 major pillars. A, border security is national security. Remember when the president said that unvetted refugees from the Syrian civil war cannot just walk into the United States? Nobody knows who they are, whether they're terrorists or not. You remember how much trouble he got for that? He won that Supreme Court case after unending legal challenges from the left. California lefties support open borders, sanctuary states and cities, and now full funding of illegal immigration at every level of education and healthcare. A nation that does not have borders is not a nation. One of the first things the Seattle CHOP anarchists did in their takeover of downtown Seattle was set up borders. Do you have a home with walls and doors? Everybody knows we need border control, but the Democrats have a plan to flood the nation with another 10 or 20 or 30 million illegal immigrants. That's a political operation. I've been consistently opposed, by the way, to the concept of birthright citizenship. It's not in the Constitution. The 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments were all about making the United States welcome citizenship to blacks who had been former slaves. It had nothing to do with a Saudi or a Chinese person just walking into the United States to have a baby, and then their baby becomes a citizen of the United States. That's not what the Constitution says. Number two, make America great again. Buy America, build America, and simply build our supply chains here in the United States so that we improve our economy, take control of, for example, medical supply chains. That is Trumpism number two. Same slogan as Reagan-Bush, by the way, rebuild our manufacturing base and our military. And third is simple, America first foreign policy. Ask NATO to support its own defense, a robust support for Israel and our allies, and finally challenging the human rights abuses and economic challenge posed by China. The Trump doctrine is defensive conservative nationalism, which prioritizes individual responsible states, which has been the system since the Treaty of Westphalia in 1648, rather than global governance and supranational control without accountability or consent of the governed. Political realism, support of allies, essentially Reagan's peace through strength. It was Trump who was strong against the Russians, notwithstanding Democrat lies. Sanctions on Putin and his allies, supporting Ukrainian independence and military response to Russian invasion, hurting Russia energy interests by promoting the US energy sector, helping NATO to recommit itself to its own defense against Russia, reestablishing missile defense with Poland and the Czech Republic. It's the Bidens and the Clintons and the Democrats who've been in the pocket of the Chinese. While the president takes on China and their intellectual property theft and espionage, they've now invaded and challenged India. They destroyed Hong Kong independence, the Chinese. They keep the Uyghur Muslims in concentration camps. They gave the world the coronavirus. They threw out the media. They denied medical cooperation. They sent Chinese people into Italy on purpose to spread the virus. They bought up all the PPE, the personal protective equipment. China is a surveillance state at this point. They track your life on your cell phone in China. You get a social credit score. If you jaywalk in Wuhan or Shanghai, by the time you get across the street, the fine they assess on you has already been charged to your bank account by the time you cross the street. The president said no more global tests for American action. No more citizens of the world. We're citizens of the United States. We're going to rebuild our military. I cite the president's Poland speech. Google that. His speech in Poland was magnificent. And his two major speeches at the UN, where he challenged the UN to return to national sovereignty, not global governance. He said no to the International Criminal Court, no to the corrupt UN Human Rights Commission. This president took out terrorist leaders, the ISIS founder, Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi, Yemeni al-Qaeda chief, Qasim al-Rimi, Hamza bin Laden, General Qasem Soleimani, the worst terrorist in the world. This president brokered the peace between Turkey and Syria, reduced our casualties in Afghanistan and Iraq, changed our approach at the UN, supported Israel at the UN, said no to the DC office of the PLO, no pay for slay, the Taylor Force Act, challenged the awful Iran deal, rejected that deal, defunded support of Iranian terror, changed our approach to Israel, of course, moving our embassy to Jerusalem, promised by every president, recognized Israeli sovereignty over the Golan Heights, clarified that international law does not per se mean that Israeli control over historic Judea and Samaria is per se illegal. The president pushed a peace process. Peace in the Middle East runs through Trump, not Ramallah in the West Bank. The president created this normalized relationship between the UAE and Israel, and others will follow. And the president just pushed for snapback sanctions on Iran. One more major point. Do you remember the Obama foreign policy? Obama serially leaked multiple IDF forces and Mossad plans vis-a-vis both the Islamic Republic and the Syrian Arab Republic, declassified documents revealing Israel's own nuclear program, conducted secret negotiations Obama did with Iran, leading to sanctions relief, threatened to shoot down Israeli jets if they targeted Iran, condemned Israeli actions against Iranian nuclear scientists, and urged Palestinian restraint after Palestinian terrorism. Obama considered Biden, the former chair of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, a key part of his foreign policy team. Biden stood by during the Iran nuclear deal debate while the US administration castigated with ugly dual loyalty smears against wavering American Jewish senators and those lobbying in opposition to the deal. Scholar Michael Oren summarized the Obama era as the darkest ever for US-Israel relations.
Brilliant. You know, I think I'm going to call you Professor Greenfield.
Okay.
So, Professor, I want you to answer this question in a way that a usable tool that our audience can use with them, to bring with them. Please prosecute the case against today's radical Democratic Party.
So, Mitch and Bruce and JRA, elections are usually about peace and prosperity, about security and hope for our future. We simply compare and contrast. And that's what I think the entire Republican convention will be next week. The Obama economy was the worst economic performance over any 8-year period since we started keeping statistics in 1790. Food stamps and poverty and low employment and low participation rates in labor and low home ownership. Democratic cities are a shambles. New York is collapsing in front of our very eyes with capital flight. California, the one-party state, is the same. Rolling blackouts are just the tip of the spear. What do we get for all this high taxes in California? Not good roads, more homelessness, capital flight, a worse economy. The Democrats believe that if a business charges more than its competition, that's gouging and profiteering. But if a business charges the same as its competition, that's price fixing and collusion. And if a business charges less than its competition, that's unfair business practices. What's going on campuses is a hint of what a left-wing government will bring us. I mentioned Princeton earlier, the school of James Madison. Today's Princeton has a racism tribunal, which is now going to pay professors more depending on the color of their skin and institute a faculty committee that will oversee the research and publication of every faculty member and count as racist anything that doesn't meet their politically correct notions. Cancel culture. Finally, the good news, some liberals are starting to tell the truth about the Stalinist left. Matt Taibbi, Sam Harris, Andrew Sullivan, finally even some liberal voices in Hollywood. Look at the Democratic strategy over the last 4 years. Doxing and rioting and resistance and intimidation and showing up at homes and restaurants to beat up on Republicans and obstructionism and the Kavanaugh corruption and massive hoaxes, Russia, Ukraine, and a completely partisan impeachment. They don't have an economic plan. And as I've mentioned, they don't tell the truth about radical Islam. They don't tell the truth about China. Remember that Biden said when President Trump, correctly probably saving millions of lives, I think millions of lives, no China's tourism into the United States in January, Biden called that reflexively hysterical xenophobia. This is a party that is post-constitutional. They've already threatened to end the Senate filibuster. They don't believe in the presumption of innocence. The ACLU now is loyal only to free speech, which is leftist speech. It's a radical party with a radical agenda. They don't even hide it.
Thank you, Larry. We're going to go to some questions from the audience right now. Terry D asks, why do Jews not understand that, well, I think she's referring to left-wing Jews. Why do they not understand that this president is a friend of Jews and Israel? So talk about that, and talk about the part I don't understand is, why is there such ingratitude on the Jewish left?
Because it would violate the new religion of the Jewish left, which isn't Judaism, it's progressivism. Scholars study Jewish voting patterns and membership in political parties and affiliation. They argue that sociologically, many Jews who came over as immigrants in the late 1800s, early 1900s were wrapped into a coalition with the Democrats. So people tend to vote the way their parents and grandparents did. So there's a sociological history to Jews being Democrats. Okay, hopefully it changes as people start to grow up and think for themselves, and as one generation passes on to the next. And then it's ideological. What Norman Podhoretz wrote in his book, Why Are Jews on the Left? Why Are Jews Liberals? And it is a replacement of tradition and text and Jewish conservatism and ideas and even American first principles with the new progressivism, the new left. So it's ideological. And Jews are cocooned into a left-wing kind of milieu at campus and, as I mentioned, in Congress. And so what they hear on biased television, if you watch CNN and MSNBC all day, you don't even know these arguments. You don't hear the words missile defense and Iron Dome. None of this gets into your consciousness. So sociological, ideological, and finally, where I began, which is theological. There's a still anger at 1,800-year-old, 1,500-year-old, 1,000-year-old Catholic, mostly Christian anti-Semitism, and a failure to tell the truth now about radical Islamic anti-Semitism, about leftist anti-Zionism. And so it's just taking a while for some of our co-religionists to compare and contrast who are our friends today. And by the way, they don't have a secret scheme, which is a smear of Christians. You talked about in a previous call with Robert Stearns, Genesis 12:3, I will bless those who bless you and curse those who curse you. Could there be a better rationale for trusting the alliance between Christians and Jews, that Christians feel deeply in their religion, that they'll be rewarded for sticking to the plan, that Jews are their older brother, and that we're teammates in bringing the word of God to the world? So there's a lot of Jewish Democrats who are fundraisers for the Democratic Party, tied into the Democratic Party. Jews are an urban people, and that's where the votes are. We're making progress. At its low, Jewish Republicans were about 10% in 1992. We're up to about 30% now of the Jewish community voting Republican. We won't rest till it's more than 50%.
Wonderful. Larry, you kind of touched on this, but we have a great question from Darren S. asking about how do we get through to these Jewish leftist elites, whether they're celebrities or politicians or wealthy business owners? How on earth do we get through to them?
So one of the things that's happening is liberals are now starting to get heat from the left. So you're seeing some very honorable, honest liberals, classic liberals, or even modern liberals, starting to tell the truth about the radical left. Even Bill Maher, and I mentioned Sam Harris. Sam Harris is a genius. I love his podcast. He's not a conservative. He's not a Republican. He hates President Trump, but he knows that the radical left supports radical Islam and is brutal on campuses and opposes free speech. Look at the comedians. Jerry Seinfeld cannot speak on campus as a comic because the left thinks he's politically incorrect. So they have no sense of humor. So liberals are starting to peel off, and they know that the left has gone crazy. I think, Mitch, that the violence in all the cities is going to tell suburban women who have homes and families, we can't trust the left. That's anarchic. That's what Lincoln warned about, mobocratic rule. Anyone who has a kid or a grandkid who wants an economic future would have to think twice about the fact that Republicans keep bringing the country economic growth and jobs, and the left doesn't. They want redistribution of wealth. They have no agenda to give jobs to your kids. So on national security, I think we outpoll the left by far, conservatives do, year after year, decade after decade after national security. So it's important to keep talking about that. They barely mention national security in the Democratic Convention. They don't have much to say about that. They're not really willing to confront China. Biden got his son $1.5 billion from the Chinese. They're in bed with the Chinese. Trump took on the Chinese. And to their credit, many Democrats finally told the truth about that. And they said, yeah, the Chinese have taken all of our manufacturing jobs, and they lie, cheat, and steal. And they are in your computer, and they are in our companies. Intellectual property theft, espionage. That's China today.
Larry, we have a question from Amy R. She says, hi, Larry. With rabbis in such prominent positions in our community, they've chosen to remain silent about all this anti-Semitic activity that is really going on in our country. How can rabbis continue to remain silent and continue to support the Jewish left and not really pay attention to what's going on right around them in front of their own eyes?
So I'm respectful of Jewish life. I've been very engaged in Jewish life. And gently, privately, we can have conversations with rabbis, and they will sometimes tell the truth. Of course, there are a few, and I really mean it, a few white supremacists and bad actors. The KKK, of course, was a product of the Democratic Party. They never tell you that. But there are right-wing, alt-right anti-Semites. But by far, the risk to Jews today and Israel today and Jewish students today, and they just, my friend, his daughter was the beautiful girl at USC who had to resign from student government because the left beat her up so much over being a Zionist. It had previously happened at UCLA. Do you know that on campuses throughout this country, the left is telling student government leaders, you can't be in student government if you've ever even visited Israel? Why don't rabbis tell the truth about anti-Semitism from the left? Privately, some of them see it and admit it, but their big donors are liberals. So we have to vote with our wallet. You need to tell your rabbi, I want equal time. That's all we're asking. I want you to tell the truth from the pulpit about the left and hostility to Israel and to Jewry and about Ilhan Omar and Linda Sarsour and Sharpton and all the rest. And by the way, there used to be 6 Jewish congressmen and women who were Democrats from New York. They're down to 2 because the left is going right after pro-Israel Jewish Democrats. The Democratic Party is throwing out the Jews and welcoming in radical Muslims.
Boy, Larry, you got the audience going. There's so many great questions here for you. It's one person wants to know when you're running for office, but let's go with this one's a really good one. It's from Ted B. Explain the real meaning of Tikkun Olam. As you know, the Reformed Judaism worships an incorrect understanding of Tikkun Olam.
I'm so happy for that question, and it's a wise question. The very phrase, L'takein olam b'malchut Shaddai, means to improve or repair or heal the world under the kingdom of the Lord. And it applied hundreds of years ago to enforce capital punishment that we needed to remove from our midst murderers and killers. I have been passionately in favor of capital punishment. I was very active helping Governor Schwarzenegger, does that name ring a bell? Not to allow clemency for Stanley Tookie Williams. The left argued he didn't do it. Tookie Williams didn't kill all those people. Or they argued he did it, but he's super sorry. I'm like, is that the way to do it? But if he did it, he's super sorry. He wasn't sorry. It was all a fraud. And thank God Governor Schwarzenegger did not offer clemency, and Stanley Tukey Williams was executed when capital punishment came back to California. L'Taken Olam, repair the world, became a buzzword and then a social action policy at every synagogue, Reform synagogue for sure, in the United States. There's nothing wrong for caring for the widow, the poor, and the orphan. I like the idea that mediating institutions, not government, but synagogues, are involved in social causes in our country. Just don't claim that it comes from the Torah and from the tradition to have Democratic Party policy with your thumb on the scale as the only way to think about helping the widow, the poor, and the orphan. How come Black conservatives are never mentioned on CNN? They don't have ideas to help the Black community? As President Trump cleverly said, what have you got to lose? Walter Williams and Shelby Steele and Larry Elder and Burgess Owens and so many others, I don't want to leave anybody out. Black conservatives have something to say about the inner city. So do Jewish conservatives. So did Milton Friedman. Economic growth, mentorship, apprenticeships, getting the boot of government off our back. Do you know who's passionately conservative these days? Minority moms who are not being given school choice and competition because teachers' unions dominate the Democratic Party of California and nationally and won't allow money to follow parents, and they preventing all that money from going to alternative schools, charter schools, which, by the way, far outperform government schools.
Larry, you're really speaking so well to our audience. They're very excited. The questions continue to come in, and they're all supportive. We have a question from Alex K. His question is, there's been a concerted effort in the mainstream media and the press to portray the Israeli United Arab Emirates deal as either being no big deal or having nothing to do with President Trump. What are the facts regarding that deal, and how can the White House make a strong argument to get the true facts out?
So I love that question. It's very clear. The Democrats, the left, have been wrong, 180 degrees wrong. They thought that we could counter jihad, counter terror, and calm down the rise of radical Islamism, which has been going on now for decades, by beating up on our ally Israel. And that if we could force Israel to sit down with the Palestinians and give up more and more and more land, as Israel's always done, for example, 2/3 of its landmass in Egypt, to get with Egypt, to get peace with Egypt, or to sacrifice its security buffer in southern Lebanon, or to compromise in Gaza, or which they did withdraw, or to compromise in the West Bank, Judea, Samaria, which Israel did with areas A, B, and C, that if we could just keep beating up on Israel, that the Arab states would be pleased. They were 180 degrees wrong. It's by focusing on the threat from Iran and drawing Israel closer to the UAE or the Saudis. Do you know what the Saudis said? Which no Democrat will admit. The Saudis said, we don't like the Palestinians. They reject every peace deal. They steal everybody's money. Their leaders live corruptly. They don't offer peace and progress for their own people. It's not the Israelis we're afraid of. It's the Iranians. The UAE normalization with Israel is the long-sought Arab-Israeli peace following, and it's been decades now since Jordan and before that Egypt. And the Democrats are so petty, they can't give credit. Trump brought a peace plan to the Palestinians with Jared Kushner and Ambassador Friedman and Ron Dermer and many others. And it said to the Palestinians, no more rejectionism. We're going to give you $50 billion and your own state. We're going to test you now. Are you ready to make peace and come to the table? And the Palestinians still said no. Until they can reform and really seek peace, we won't have peace between the Israelis and the Palestinians, but Israel will flourish, so will the Arab world, and we will defeat the mullahs of Iran with the Arab-Israeli peace that Trump is helping bring about.
Larry, I'm going to combine a couple of questions here, but is there a link that you would like Mark Widower or Tracy Carrasco to send out to our audience to learn more information about you or the work you're doing or any of the books or articles?
Well, that's great. I mean, I'll recommend Claremont.org, which is my think tank, claremont.org. I really want to re-recommend Jewish Republican Alliance to everybody, of course, and I just re-upped my annual dues. Tikva, Tikvah, fund.org, Mosaic Magazine, Tablet Magazine. Those are all good sources for everybody. I'm sure I'm leaving out one or two. Oh yeah, the Jewish Journal. Please put in jewishjournal.com/author, or just Google Jewish Journal author Larry Greenfield, and I'd love for people to see some of my articles.
Okay, so here's the question. Thank you for that, Larry. Here's the questions it's a combination between Howard W. and Jessica T. Let's talk about the young generation, the millennials, the Gen Zs, younger children of color. They're being brainwashed by the schools and the media, and then throw in with that, how do we handle that? Plus the new bill being signed by Newsom, making the critical ethnic studies mandatory for graduation. It's all very frightening what's being done to our children.
Yeah, I'm very happy with Birthright Israel and other efforts in Jewish life to get Jews to visit Israel and be proud of our history and the U.S.-Israel alliance. I'm proud of the JRA for being so interested in the alliance part, friendship with Christians, and certainly with conservative blacks and Hispanics. I think we need to go after the Asian vote very hard. Asians live in urban America, so the people they meet are often Democratic city councilmen and legislators, but they're conservative economically and culturally. The Asian vote is ripe for us to grow in the Asian vote, especially the Indian American vote. And finally, the young people vote. You just got to show up. You got to invite them in. We should host maybe JRA programs for young adults and have a young adult division of the JRA. The questioner is correct. That's the future. That's the vote.
Well, Larry, I want to thank you for being here. You're a gentleman and a scholar. People don't know what an amazing influence that Larry has had on the formation of the JRA. He has been a friend, a mentor. I always remember Mitch and I at another Republican Jewish event, probably at least 15 years ago, when we were surrounded by 800 people, and I whispered in Mitch's ear, I can't imagine that we will ever find a group of people where we have this much in common with, the same religion, the same demographics, political views, geography. And you have been just such a great friend over the years, and we so appreciate it. And your amazing presentation today, I'm sure, will be replayed many times.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
This is really a battle, my friends. The JRA will continue to unite and energize conservatives to take action on behalf of America and Israel. We're going to continue to keep on fighting. We're going to give you the ammunition you need to bring that to the public. Next week, we're going to be hosting the senior editor of Breitbart, Joe Pollack, and he's going to be amazing too. We're excited to announce we're reforming some additional groups across the country. We're now going to be in New York, Boca Raton, Florida, and in Santa Barbara. So we're doing great things. We really appreciate your support. If you want more information about the Jewish Republican Alliance, you can become a member. You can give us a donation of any kind, which we appreciate, would help this mission go forward. Just go to our website, thejewishrepublicanalliance.org, or you can listen to all our Zoom calls on our YouTube channel. There's so many ways you can get in touch with us through our social media. We want to thank you all for being here. Until we meet again, we wish you a very peaceful Shabbat. Shabbat Shalom, everybody, until we meet again. Thank you.
Shabbat Shalom.